The film begins with a man named Anthony, who meets a DEA agent and his friend, Juan. At that moment, Anthony, Juan, and a team of officers were on their way to raid a drug den. During the trip, Juan shared the news of his wife's pregnancy with Anthony. Upon arriving at the site of the raid, Anthony orders Juan to stay in the car. While he and his team were on the mission, the suspects were arrested and quickly taken to the police station. Anthony and some of the officers went upstairs. As they find a merchant or woman involved in a deal, Anthony suddenly encounters a bodyguard. While escorting the suspects downstairs, the guard grabs the policeman's gun, starting a shootout. Outside at that moment, Juan's wife called to discuss making their baby's room. It was then that the fleeing bodyguard met Juan and shot him. Anthony was witnessing the fate of one of his best friends. The scene then shifts to Nick, a man enjoying life. His friend Francis, a government employee, approaches Nick and informs Nick that the government has requested his help with an assignment. Nick is a retired hitman who used to work with the government. He did not accept the offer at first due to his old age. However, after Francis promised him a large financial compensation, Nick agreed. His mission was to eliminate a group of merchants who threatened the American economy. Meanwhile, Anthony, who was still mourning Juan's death in his office, received an offer of leave from his boss, but chose to continue working. Juan's wife visited Anthony and asked him to catch her husband's killer. Anthony and his boss later questioned the dealer from the previous raid. When the merchant was asked about his provider, he replied cryptically and inexplicably that his boss had bigger plans. After further questioning, the trader agreed to disclose information in an interview, providing luxury accommodation and a reduced sentence. In return, Anthony's boss agreed to his terms. The next day, Nick gets his guns back and he swaps his license plates. After learning of his target's location, he heads there and stops to enjoy an iced coconut while observing the area. Disguised as golf equipment and concealing his weapon, he entered the apartment across the street. Meanwhile, the merchant was in a hotel receiving a body massage. Moments later, Anthony and officers arrived to pick him up. They ordered him to quickly get dressed in order to return to the police station. When the merchant approached the car, he was suddenly shot dead. He was the first target for Nick. Anthony ran across the street to locate the shooting. The next day, Anthony's boss informs him that an undercover agent has identified a group he suspects is the alleged gang, and is instructing Anthony to keep watch on the gang. Anthony and his team set up a monitoring session, but were unable to hear any conversations due to the lack of audio on the hacked CCTV feed. Anthony then decided to sneak into the site posing as a customer, but was denied entry to a VIP-only room. After that, noticed a chef leaving the building. He quickly followed her, and as soon as she left, he approached her to introduce himself, but she refused and walked away from him. However, when he revealed to her that he was a DEA agent, she agreed to talk to him. Her name is Mina. He asked for her help in planting a tape recorder on the VIP room table. At first she refused, fearing losing the job if she was exposed, but eventually agreed after Anthony persuaded her. That night, through the device, Anthony watches Mina put down the tape recorder he gave her. Meanwhile, Nick was preparing for his next assignment at the same location. He noticed a group entering the room for a meeting. When Anthony and his team were watching the group, they kept a low profile and prevented Anthony from overhearing their conversation. Nick entered the building through the emergency exit. The scene introduces the main antagonist, Hussein bin Ferry, an illegal goods supplier who plans to weaken the US economy. In order to carry out his plan, he hires a scientist to create a device capable of shutting down the entire city's power grid with a single tap on a cell phone. Soon after, Nick attacked them, which resulted in the elimination of Hussein's bodyguards and right-hand man. While the scientist, Hussein, and the remaining men escaped, Anthony arrived too late. The next day, Mina discovered that her workplace had been closed by the police. Meanwhile, Hussein asked the scientist to complete the device, as the current version was experimental. The scientist agreed, but for $50 million, it is approved. That evening, Anthony attended a party hosted by Hussein's niece, where he tried to find out where Hussein was from her, but she didn't know. Later, Anthony met Mina, who was the event cook. Hussein and the bodyguard who killed Juan were watching without his knowledge. The bodyguard identified Anthony as one of the DEA agents who targeted them, so Hussein ordered him to get rid of him. Anthony saw Nick at the party and compared it to a photo on his phone, but Nick had already left. Anthony asks Mina to help him hunt down Nick, but they fail to catch him. The next day, Anthony continues his search and eventually finds Nick's car. He catches up with Nick and asks him who he is, and he finds out that Nick is his biological father, who abandoned him in high school. Nick takes Anthony to his boat and explains his past as a murderer and government employee. After Anthony's mother is killed by an enemy of Nick, Nick gave up his son for his safety. Anthony understood Nick's decision and knew their assignments coincided. Their mission was to bring down Hussein, who seeks to destroy the American economy. As Anthony prepares to leave, Nick gives him a cell phone to communicate. But as Anthony approaches his car, Hussein's bodyguard ambushes him. Nick could not help injured Anthony. The scene shifts to the scientist, who tells Hussein that the device will be completed in 24 hours. Moments later, Hussein's men brought Anthony to him. Hussein interrogates him about the sniper killing his men, and Hussein reveals that it was his father's doing. Hussein ordered his men to torture Anthony. Meanwhile, Nick tries to find Anthony using the GPS installed on the phone he gave him. Suddenly, the electricity went out in Anthony's building. Nick entered the room and quickly eliminated them all. Some individuals were killed while others escaped. Nick took Anthony to his boat for medical attention. After the incident, the police, including Anthony's boss, arrive at the crime scene. The police only found several of Hussein's dead followers. Anthony's boss has discovered a device that Hussein intends to use to destroy the American economy. The next evening, when Anthony is talking to Nick, Mina calls him, held hostage by the bodyguard. He asked to meet him immediately. When Anthony goes to save Mina, Nick warns him not to be reckless and offers to help him. Upon arriving at the designated location, Anthony was approached by a bodyguard who held Mina at gunpoint. The bodyguard ordered Anthony to call his father as well. Suddenly, Nick shoots the bodyguard from a distance. The bodyguard revealed Hussein's location for $1 million. The scene shifts to Hussein's residence. The scientist demanded immediate payment for his work. As his family needed money, Hussein refused and told him that the police had the device. Then he shot the scientist. Hussein's niece, who was witnessing the event, realized Hussein's criminal nature. Moments later, the bodyguard arrives, pointing his gun at Nick and carrying a bag containing the corpse of Anthony, who pretended to be dead. The bodyguard revealed Hussein's miserliness, which led him to betrayal. Nick orders his nephew to leave, as she was unaware of Hussein's illegal activities. Hussein's men attack, but Anthony and his father effortlessly finish them off, including Hussein. The bodyguard asked Nick to give him a $1 million reward, and suggested he look for work instead. Half an hour later, the police arrived and found Hussein and his men dead, as well as a body bag with the bodyguard inside. The movie ends with Nick, Anthony, Mina, his husband Juan, and her son gathered on a boat. Juan's wife is grateful to Anthony for informing her of Juan's insurance and her son's welfare after her husband's death. Soon after, Francis contacts Anthony with a new secret assignment in San Diego. If you want interesting movie recaps like these, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.